I do identify as a European. I'm from my household, from my background, I'm half American, half German, but I grew up in Europe, oh, well, in Germany, for most of my life, or my entire life really, in childhood wise. And I've come to realize, while I used to question my identity or question what I identify most with, I've come to realize that culturally and politically, I very much identify as a European. I am a huge proponent of Project Europe, based on our shared common values, or European values of freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, respect for human rights, respect for minorities. I think that to be European is to be part of this multicultural project, based on respect and love for one another. That's how I choose to see it, and that's how I believe in it. And based on that, I definitely identify as European. I've thought a lot about how my childhood has shaped my life, and growing up in Germany, and more broadly growing up in Europe. I do think, however, that my formative European moment or European experience is actually before I was born. To me, my formative European moment is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So, as I said before, I'm half German, half American, and from my German side, my entire family is from the former East. So, my father grew up behind the wall, and it came down during his last year of school. So his graduation year was, talk about a formative moment for him. And I think it took him 3 days after the wall came down that he crossed the border with his own motorcycle, and discovered the rest of Germany. And it was, let's say, 3 years later, that he moved to. He always says he moved abroad. He moved to the former West, and my mother did a study abroad in the same city in Germany. She was studying in Chicago at the time, and they met each other. And here we are, 28 years later, and here, like, I'm here. I have two siblings. So the fall of the Berlin Wall really was the event that allowed me to even exist. So I think, in terms of a formative uh, pre-life experience, it's that for me. For me, it's more of a movement. There are, of course, events that I could point to, such as the refugee crisis was a terrible human moment in European history, due to the fact that it was happening, and that the let me restart that, actually. Um, there are a lot of events that I could point to, for the worst European moment, or event that happened in recent history in Europe. But to me, it is actually more a movement that I could identify as being the worst. And that, to me, is the rise of populism, and the rise of right-wing extremism, and extremism in general, but definitely the right-wing response. So, for instance, I think that, for instance, in 2015, the refugee crisis, or the beginning of the refugee crisis, or the pinnacle of that, better, is one of those moments that you could point to for the worst European moment. But I think that the reaction to it, the political reaction, was maybe far worse, in my opinion. What should be seen as a humanitarian crisis, or what should have been identified as such, was seen as a security crisis, and a security threat, and was also politicized as such, in Germany, but also in other places, not from Angela Merkel per se, with wanting to take in 1 million refugees at the time, but the movements, the splinter movements that were created, or that formed in response to the refugee crisis, and also in response now to the COVID pandemic. I think those are far more threatening to me, because they are proof of something more fundamental that's happening that is beyond singular events, but is more of a movement that I find is very threatening to the idea and the project of Europe, and especially based on the principle of solidarity. And that is something that I myself see as a fundamental value to be European. And so for European history, I think that this rise of populism and far right extremism is perhaps the worst thing to happen in recent history. Thankfully, there are a lot of very good moments in recent history. The one thing I would love to highlight for myself is the Paris Agreement, and in general the more rigorous and um, publicized effort to combat to for climate action to combat climate change. I think that the Paris Agreement is a huge moment for Europe and for the world in general. And here, again, in my personal view as being half American, it's been absolutely disheartening to see over the last 4 years what has happened in terms of climate action from a big actor such as the United States. And in contrast, although I think that there's a lot more to do and a lot more to be done right now and for future goals, I think it is very wonderful to see that climate action is being taken more seriously and continuously being pushed by the public, but also now by more um, central politics of nations or of member states of the EU and of the EU in general. So with other climate action deals to come or climate actions to be taken, I think that the Paris Agreement is one of the best moments in recent European history. Growing up in Germany and the EU, I mean, first of all, the existence of the EU has built long-lasting peace, which, as a German, was not necessarily a given before the EU. Of course, that was way before my time, but that does not mean that I don't appreciate the long-lasting peace that the EU has built. In addition, there are just so many freedoms that an EU citizen such as myself does not have to think about. So the freedom of movement, the abolition of roaming charges, um, the protection or the assurance of the quality of goods, um, whether that's medicine or food or pharmaceuticals. There's so much that I do not have to worry about, that I don't have to double check or research rigorously, because I can trust that that protection is being assured by the fact that I am an EU citizen. And in contrast to my American family and friends, I can't tell you what a privilege that is. There's so much that I have learned about the EU, not because of living here, but because I explain my life to friends and family, and they are mind blown by the freedoms that we have and the protection and universal healthcare that we have in Europe, or that we have in the EU. And in contrast to my American identity, I just realized just so much about what the EU has done for me personally. I've worked abroad, I've studied abroad. I'm now taking part in an Erasmus Mundus program for my master's studies, part of which is financed through the EU. So I quite frankly, I couldn't narrow it down to one thing. I could only say that it's quite frankly a privilege to be an EU citizen. The EU law with the with the greatest impact on my life is the freedom of movement. I've studied abroad, I've lived abroad, I've just traveled abroad into so many different EU countries, and without any issues. It's and I've had to go to the doctor and different places, because things happen, and I've not encountered any fundamental issues with doing so in different EU countries, regardless of national language or etiquette or anything. The freedom of movement has really been very impactful in the sense that it's just not been an issue at all to be very creative and free about your life choices. The one thing I would like the EU to achieve before 2030 is to be far more aggressive in their climate action. I think that it is great that we are taking action now. I have high hopes in the European Green Deal if it is to pass. Um, but I do think that we should have been a lot more eager to take action a lot sooner. I think that the deadlines or the projected deadlines that we're running against for to achieve effective change for climate action are very soon. They're very tight deadlines. And I think that although it is great that we're taking action now and having the goal of being carbon neutral by 2050, I don't think that that is enough. I think that it would be nice if we could have that by 2030. Although that is a very ambitious goal, I think that is part of the beauty to me of the EU is that we can aim to push for very ambitious goals. And I think that it would be nice if the EU could lead the charge and be um, not just by default, but for progressive action, be a leader in climate change, or to combat climate change and to be a leader in climate action. That would be the greatest goal by 2030 if we could be carbon neutral.